Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, frequent flyers. Thank you for being with us here today in the lounge. Today, my guest is Alice, and she is the podcast host of T Minus Daily, which is a space news podcast, which is the first time that we connected through LinkedIn. And you guys now know why I always hype on about LinkedIn, why it's such a powerful tool. We're here to talk about creating narratives for the space industry, specifically through podcasts, but in general, how do we craft the narrative in a way that really showcases what we are doing? Science communication is so important. And yet, a lot of times, that information is so complex, it kind of remains up here, and the general public doesn't fully understand. One of Alice's missions is to change this and to help bridge that gap so that we can bring more people into the fold so that they can understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how they can be a part of it. Alice, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, Sarah. It's really an honor to be asked to come on your podcast.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. I love doing when someone is traditionally in a role where they're kind of interviewing or they're bringing people on, and then having them come on the show is really wonderful because it's a chance to kind of dive into the behind the scenes. And I know you're probably going to jump in with your own questions, but that's why we're here, is to have a conversation.
Yeah, I've already apologized in advance to Sarah before we came on air. So it's weird being the other side of the conversation when people are asking you questions. My natural instinct is always to ask. I'm genuinely interested in other people's stories. That's why I got into this field. So if I start to bombard you with questions, just stop me halfway through. It'll be fine.
No, that's wonderful. And it's really lovely to see that curiosity in action. It's a natural thing for a lot of us. I definitely am insatiably curious, and I love to learn people's stories. I love to share them. I love to just learn in general. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun today.
Yeah, me too.
So one of the things that I wrote down, because as I was kind of going through your background, reading your LinkedIn and just doing a little bit of research on you before today's show, I saw that you talk a lot about wonder and discovery. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on why this should be a part of our everyday life.
That's a really good question. And it's just a natural thing for humans to be curious. That's the reason why we've explored for so many years. And certainly the reason why we're looking to the cosmos as our next exploration area. If you go back in human history, we've always gone beyond our natural little areas, whether it's curious because we want to know what's going on in another area, or whether it's expansion of human race. And I think we kind of lost sight of that a little bit. People naturally do want to travel. They want to see more. And I think that's all part of that wonder and exploration that we have as an innate ability within us, or innate need within us to find out more and discover more. And you look at, when I used to do a lot of STEM outreach, and I'd speak to a lot of children, and they have this natural ability to ask questions and not have that inability, that need to pull back and say, oh, I can't ask that. They know it's quite the opposite. They'll ask all the questions that I think are really interesting. And I think we as an adult start to lose that natural curiosity. We're almost told, don't keep questioning what's going on around
Right.
you, accept the narrative. And we shouldn't be like that. We should always be curious. We should always be asking the right questions. And that's part of why I went into journalism. I wanted to be somebody who was there on the front line, asking the right questions, and hopefully then getting the answers for the people around me.
Beautiful. And I know you have children that are nearing their teenage years. They're still in adolescence. Do you still see that they have this curiosity, this natural inclination to ask questions, or have you noticed a drop off? I'm really curious about that.
So my son's 9. He is definitely a questioner. In fact, it's one of the things that he's got 2 teachers. He does an advancing education, and he has his general teacher. And it's funny how his advanced teacher says, I just love how he's constantly asking questions. And his other teacher says, you know what? Nathaniel's constantly asking questions and disrupting everybody around him. So it's funny how people approach it differently. I mean, I really encourage it. He sometimes goes off on crazy tangents, and you'll be talking about one subject matter, and all of a sudden he'll ask you what year Ghostbusters was released, and it's completely a tangent to what you're talking about. And I can see the frustration of an educator going and approaching that. But I've always really encouraged curiosity of my kids in everything we do. I want them to ask questions. I want them to question the sources of it. That I think is really important and key, particularly with social media nowadays. My kids get a lot of their information off of YouTube because that's what
Yeah.
children tend to do. It's encouraged almost nowadays. So I find it really interesting to get them to question their sources. Where did that information come from? Is it accurate? What's the point of it? And that is something I think that they hopefully will take into the classroom and continue with as they get older. Uh, my daughter's generally much better at being a crowd pleaser. So her
Okay.
questioning tends to be a little bit more restrained because she's that little bit older and she doesn't want to cause any stirring up the status quo. So I'm trying to nudge her a little bit more to be back to that curious nature in the way she approaches things.
Yeah, no, amazing. And some of that is personality also. And it is funny depending on which teacher you're with, what culture you're in, what particular class it is. Like if it was a philosophy class, it would be ask more questions, right? But
Yeah.
if it's another class where there's maybe more like math, okay, so ask it once you have the framework and everything, like this is the way. That we're not really going into other realms of possibility necessarily until you get like much later down the line in the math journey. And it is very interesting, but I'm glad that you're encouraging that. And it's important to ask questions regularly, both of the information we're getting and of ourselves. And
Yeah, I think so. We were talking beforehand about mathematics and how both of us were kind of a bit off the idea of math. Maybe it's because of that. Maybe it's because both of us are more curious.
you know what? That's a great point. And I think math gives this structure, right? It's that this is the formula. You plug the information in. There is one answer. It's absolute in that sense, right? You're not going to get a very variety of answers with this formula. 2 + 2 = 5. 5 is the whole concept of teamwork is bigger than the sum of its parts. That's the philosophical side of it. But in math, 2 + 2 is 4. It will always be 4 until we learn a different math system, which, who knows, maybe one day then that will be disproven. But I feel like it gives the structure and safety. So for some people, that's what they love. And there's a beauty to math also, like math and music are very related. And so that's where we can see it start to intersect more with the creative side. But you might be onto something there. The more curious people are the ones who may not necessarily like that math structure.
It's funny that I think that's what kind of draws me to science and space, because when I
Mm,
was growing up, you're encouraged to think of it like math. That it's a structure thing. This is the answer. The science says this is the answer. But actually, the more I've worked in science, the more the answer isn't obvious. We talk
yeah,
about things like where does space begin? And I'd throw this out to students and say, you tell me, where does space begin? And you'd get the
yeah,
general answers of 100 kilometers up, 50 miles up, whatever it is.
yeah.
But actually, you'll find that when you start to pose the right questions, they start to think outside the box. I'm like, well, who decided it was
Mm,
100 kilometers? Who decided it was 50 miles up? Why did they make that decision? And then we talk about the highest point on the earth being, uh, in Nepal, sorry, Mount Everest, my mind went completely blank. But I say to the students, I'm like, can you stand at the point at the top of Mount Everest and breathe? And they're like, I'm like
yeah.
superhumans. I'm like, could that be argued as space? And you start to talk about, when you're flying in an airplane, what happens when the oxygen goes? You get the oxygen masks come down, and you say to them, well, is that because it's a habitable space at 30,000 feet above the earth? And they're like, no, that's why you get the oxygen masks down. At 64,000 feet, your body will crush under the vacuum. Could that be argued as space? So when you start to pose the right questions to students and get them thinking about it, they start to really have that curious nature when it comes to space and science communications. And I really think that's key to what I do. And I think it's really key to what the industry should be doing, is posing questions to people as much as giving them answers.
Yes, I love that. And the definitions we have now, they're the agreed upon answer. If we look to history, there were different agreed upon answers in science, and
Hmm.
they have changed as we've gotten new information or as culture and narratives have shifted. right? And so we look at it differently. Maybe the way that we view something is, the scientific community at large agrees that, okay, this is the definition, this is how we're doing these things. But when something is breaking through and it's, someone has all of a sudden solved this unsolvable problem, or there is something that's happened for the first time. I saw recently that one microorganism like ate the other one, and then they merged, and this was like big in the science community. So that all of a sudden it makes you question, well, what else can happen? What else do we
Yeah.
assume to be true that maybe isn't? Maybe in 99.99999% of the cases it is, but then this one thing can happen. And if that starts to happen more, what does that mean? And it's part of the scientific process, the method, how we test and quantify. But it does have this very, I don't want to say loose, but this semi-permeable membrane, if you will,
Oh, I
where
like that.
membranes expand and contract, and sometimes things come through, sometimes they can't. And I feel like that's a really good analogy for, or metaphor for, science and its communication, because we're going to continue to have these types, maybe in a decade from now, or maybe when your students um, are our age or older, right? Then their definition of space will be different based on the technology and the things that have happened over the next several decades.
Absolutely. That's the whole thing about science, isn't it? We have a theory and then we have to test it out, and then you have to figure out the results from that testing and putting it into practice. And that's what I kind of hope to spark when I talk to students, particularly, but to everybody, question
Yeah.
everything around you, ask your source, find out what it comes from, why it's there, and why it's important to you. And that's really the
Yeah.
whole key of marketing. And it goes across in everything, doesn't it? Who, what, when, where, why? Why is this important to you? So that's
Yeah.
pretty much what attracted me to communications in the first place. My background was in journalism. It was about storytelling. I was very attracted to going to the Middle East and telling the stories about what was going on over there. And then found myself here in the US and becoming a space communicator. There's a lot of parallels to it, and I don't think people really realize that community, when it comes to storytelling, it's the same the world over, and it's the same community over, and there's a lot of crossovers. And I think the space industry is notoriously known for being this cool industry with these great uh, breakthroughs that have affected us here in life on Earth, but they're really notoriously bad when it comes to communicating how important space is to the general public.
Yeah, I would agree. It seems, how do I get into this industry? There's this conception that, which is a misconception, that you must be a rocket scientist or come
Mhm.
from a military background, or, you must be an engineer. And it's very much these heavy science technical roles that the mind tends to go to. And so if I didn't study that, if I'm not doing that now, there's no chance for me, is usually what I hear. And to a large part, I believed for a long time myself. But we need communicators, we need marketers, we need accountants, right? We still need somebody to do the books, we need someone to file the tax, we need someone to work with government. Like, there's so many different roles. So what would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions that you have seen coming
Mm.
into this industry and helping to tell these stories to help close those barriers? What are some of the common ones?
That's a really good question. I wasn't one of these people that grew up wanting to work in space, and I always feel a bit like an imposter when I'm sat on panels and talking about what I do. Nearly everybody introduced themselves saying, "Hi, I'm Bob," and I grew up wanting to be an astronaut. I knew nothing about the space community. I knew nothing about space science at all. I grew up in just outside of London in the UK, and didn't even know that the UK had a space industry, let alone the fact that they are the second largest producer of satellites outside of Silicon Valley, which is very British. I hate to say it, we're very terrible at talking ourselves up. So that was part of the problem. I think the misconception is exactly that. It's that you have to have a science and engineering background to get into space. And even people in the industry still have that misconception a lot of the times.
Yeah.
I've been come across people in my career in space in the last 6 years, where people have said, "Well, you can't understand that. You're not an engineer." Um, and I sort of laugh and say, "Well, hang on a second. Just because I chose to go into media is the misconception there because I was smart enough to go into engineering. I think pretty much anybody who does pretty well in school could do whatever pathway they want to. I just have a
Yeah.
passion for storytelling, which is why I chose this path. But if you
Yeah.
show me the math, I'm sure at some point my brain would figure it out. It just might be a little bit slower than most people." And I'm married to an engineer, so I kind of laugh and joke with him all the time that, we can both do each other's jobs. He'd be great at mine. I'm sure at some point I'd figure out his too, if I can even figure out what
Right.
it is he does. So I think that's a huge misconception is that. And the other one is skills. A lot of people say,
Mm,
well, I went to university for X, Y, and Z. I'm a perfect case study for that. I'm a, what do they call it? A geriatric millennial, born in the early 80s. So when I was going to school, there was no such thing as a space communications degree. I just came away with a
right.
journalism degree. And so it was a misconception that people don't realize that my skill set can transfer over into the space community. And there's a lot of people that have come through college that might not have had even engineering degrees, that they think, well, it wasn't aerospace engineering, so how can I go from being a
Right.
mechanical engineer into aerospace? Actually, there's a ton of transferable skills when it comes to things like that.
Yes.
Um, we're making this stuff up as we go along in a certain extent. Like,
Right.
until the early 2000s, space was just purely the federal government and the prime contractors, and it was a very niche area. And you did have to be quite the best of the best in the elite to be able to work in it. So the misconception about who works in the space industry is very valid because of that. It's still very new to us that anybody can work in space. And to your point of we need everybody, we really do. And I try and encourage people to start with a passion. Whatever
Mm,
career you go into, you've got to be passionate about it. So whether you're an accountant or in working in law, communications, office administration, if you're doing maintenance, all of that, you've got to be able to approach it every day and enjoy what you're doing. And I think if you then add
yeah.
in the space element, it does make it that little bit more fun and a little bit more sexy to most people.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to a large extent, the reason, when you saw commercial space come onto the scene and now we have the new space economy, all of a sudden, excuse me, we just saw literally this like a massive upward trajectory in a short space of time. And I would
Yeah.
argue that the reason for that is because the federal governments were not great at storytelling and explaining to the general public why tax dollars needed to go here and why this needed to be supported. On the same, I've heard that argument many times, like, oh, it's so useless and we have so many problems here on Earth. Both are true. It's not that it's useless and we do have problems here on Earth, but that phone in your hand, that baby formula you just fed your child, you know, diapers, like there's so many things that have come due to our space exploration, the science and the research and the things that we've developed. And a lot of people don't know that. And they're still
No.
surprised to find out about it. And so, that's starting to shift. There's more narrative and it obviously depends on where you go to school and the environment you grow up around, because that will change what you are exposed to. But since commercial space has come on the scene, all of a sudden the general public knows a whole lot more about it than they ever did.
Yeah, I hate to give it full credit to SpaceX for making space sexy again, but it is true. They really have. And to a certain extent, they're kind of almost like this wonderful anomaly because they've been so successful that people just assume that's what all commercial space is going to be like. And
Right.
a lot of their success has been a mixture of luck, really great people, and just having a lot of money to be able to continue through failures.
Yeah.
And that's a word
Right.
that comes up a lot in space, this idea of failure. And I get really frustrated with the general media for saying, oh, failure, 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 they didn't do this. Well, that's not what science is about. Like we
That's
go
how
back
you
to that whole
learn.
idea. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. You're not always going to get it right the first time. In fact, you have a theory in your head of what's going to happen or a theory written down, but until you put it into practice, you don't exactly know how things are going to work out. Well, space is exactly the same as that. Until you launch your rocket, until you put that payload into suborbital space, into orbital space on the moon, nobody really knows. They have an idea because of research, but you don't know
Right.
exactly how it's going to react to that environment. So it's never a failure. It's always an opportunity for you to go back to the drawing board and go, okay, that didn't work. How can we change this around? And where SpaceX has been very successful is that where a lot of the contractors that got the prime contracts through the government came through, when they failed, quote unquote, the money stopped. People said, oh, well, you
Mm.
can't do that. That's not going to work. We're going to have to find something else because the money runs out. Where SpaceX has been lucky is that they've been backed by a lot of money from Elon Musk, obviously starting with PayPal and Tesla. He's been able to continue to put money into it and say, right, I have faith in you. We agree this just needs to be tweaked. Let's work on it. And they've gone back to the drawing board and they made it work. And hopefully that message has got across to the general public, because I think that's the important message, is it's, things don't always go as planned. That doesn't mean that you've failed. It just means you've got to go back to the drawing board and say, let's tweak this. Let's see how we can make this work. And that's where I think space communication by the government has failed over the years. I'd actually argue that NASA has established a really great communications program, far better than anywhere else in the world, starting way back. If you look at the Apollo program and how they sold
Yes.
that to the public, they did an incredible job. The problem with that is that it's part of the federal government, and therefore it became political. So the money ebbed and flowed depending on what political party was in power and who decided whether or not things were worth putting the money in. You just have to go and see Apple's For All Mankind and how they flipped that narrative on the head and said, instead of saying, let's stop, let's continue to put that money in, let's see how we could have changed this up, to see the progress that could have been made by this point. And I don't think they were over exaggerating when they realized just how much progress could have been made when you look at how much is made in the last 20 years in the space industry,
Right.
since the commercial space industry started. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting area.
100%. And, I also agree with you. Yes, the US has done a remarkable job on that front, because it was there through NASA, but in other countries, no, and so we hear a lot about, well, my country didn't have a space program, so I came here, or I went this route, and this is, how I was attempting to navigate it. And especially for women or people of different ethnicities, they had a much harder journey in that, or even laughed at in some cases, or even, smeared. I heard a story at the Analog Astronaut Conference that just this past weekend about someone who experienced that and had to, with the support of her mentors, keep going and find her path forward, because it's different. And when something is different, and when it's new, it's scary.
Yeah.
But we can't push the boundaries of what's possible without trying. And so this whole concept of perfect, I want to dig into this a little bit, because a lot of times in these industries, we have very high performing type A people, right? Or very regimented analytical brains that want to control all the factors. We need to experience those imperfections and those, like, almost having like an ERP exercise, an emergency response plan, right? And pressure test things so that we can open up our minds to what might go wrong. If we just think like, this is going to be perfect the first time we do it, and it's all going to go according to plan, then when the thing actually does go wrong, the panic is going to take over, and there won't be this training or these simulations. I know NASA and all of them do these types of trainings, but what I'm saying more of is the individual, right? And their mindset of it being perfect or not perfect, that training for the imperfect and having that mindset is so critical to safety and to progress. And what would your thoughts be on that? What have you seen in terms of perfectionism within the industry? And has there been a change since you entered the industry till now?
That's a really good question. Perfection is definitely a thing in the industry. I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't think it's changed. I think there is still a lot of people out there that think they've got this great idea, and they don't know how to tell it. But I have seen a massive change since the pandemic. There's been this massive shift towards the idea of communications. I think people realized they had to shake up their business plans, and they had to have an idea of how they get more investment in. And so communication became more key to what they were doing. And I think the more people that come in and do communications for companies, whether they're employed in-house or they're a PR firm that works and specializes for space communications, and there's some really great ones out there, the more that they're exposed to that, those people tend to come from a non-space background. So they have come in and started to steer that non-perfection, that narrative of, failure is not a bad thing, which I do think is huge and it's key. And I think but what I do think we definitely need to do better is getting it outside of the space industry. We're really good at saying to people in space, oh, things didn't go to plan. And people go, oh, yeah, okay. So how are you going to approach it differently this next time? And they get it. But I still find a lot of people that I come across who don't understand why that's not a thing, like why failure is acceptable in the space industry and why we should
Right.
be putting money into it. I think as I mentioned before, growing up in England, I knew nothing about the space industry. We are the perfect example, and I've called them out. I've been very lucky in the last few years where I've come across the UK Department of Transportation, and I've been doing presentations, and I've said, hang on a second, guys. I grew up in England, and I left at 24 years old because I didn't know that there was this industry. In fact, I didn't even find out about it until I moved to New Mexico. I mean, how ridiculous is that I knew nothing about
Yeah.
what was going on in our home country? And a lot of that is cultural. We're very terrible at bigging ourselves up. That's the one thing America is very good at. And I've had to learn the hard way of putting myself out there. I still find it difficult talking about myself
Yeah.
and saying that I'm accomplished. It's a cultural thing that I'll have to get over the years. So yeah, there's definitely that problem, and I definitely think we need more people to come in from outside of the space industry to help shift that mindset for everybody, whether it's through
Mm.
communications, whether it's through the day-to-days, because certainly it comes from the leadership down, and the more people we can get in that don't have that background or have a more varied background, I
Right.
think the better. I think we're going to start to see that shift further.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that also, because when you are so close to the problem for so many years and you live and breathe the existence of a certain industry, it's very difficult to solve the problem with the mindset that created the problem, right?
Mhm.
And you are just looking at it from that one perspective. Then someone comes in from like an adjacent industry and they're coming at it like this and they go, well, have you ever thought of this? Or why would you do it that way? Just the questions that they ask, the way that they ask them. And it's usually an offhand comment or something almost flippant that then you go, wow. In Terry Trevino's words, holy shiitake mushrooms. That is exactly, what we needed in order to connect the dots, right? And it was just that hijack of being in the pattern that we've been in and this new insight, this new perspective. And so it doesn't matter whether it's the space industry or it's any industry, but having those outside inputs are so valuable because we can ask those questions. We don't know anything, right? So there's no fear of, oh, I should know that, or that's just the way it is, and you accept it. There's the curiosity can come back in almost, right? It's like that door can be open for that little kid in us to go like, wait a second, why this? Why that? How come this? Instead of it being the norm of, well, that's just the way it is.
That's why diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important in this industry. And when
Yeah.
I first started, I was working at a spaceport back in 2020. In 2021, I was going to a lot of conferences, and I was one of the few women in the room. I was younger, in my 30s at that point, and British, and so I stood out like a sore thumb for a lot of these conferences working at a spaceport. And I learned to lean into that because I wasn't an engineer like most of the guys in the room that were, I hate to say it, middle-aged white men, but it's true. And they all came from the same mindset and the same background and the same, and I was coming in as this British woman going, well, what about trying to do this? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about
Yeah.
trying to attract people from a different industry and to fill this workforce void that we've got going on? And I'm starting to see more and more of that. We've got some really great education outreach groups out there, like Higher Orbits and Teachers in Space, that are trying to approach things in a different manner and to bring in more people to the space industry. And I think that's really key moving forward. And I certainly think we need to do better. We are doing better at attracting women into the space industry. We're doing better attracting people to apply for these positions. What we are still very much lacking is retaining these people in these industries, is helping to keep them on board, getting them career growth, giving them access to training on the job, and showing them that no matter what happens, what curveball life throws at you, that you can come back to this role. And I do think that's kind of across the board. It's not just space, but speaking as a mother myself, I can tell you that it is difficult when you decide to have kids, whether or not you go back to them, particularly here in the US, where they don't do very good when it comes to maternity or paternity leave. You get
No,
into
it's
this
terrible.
frustrated situation of, oh, I want children, I'm in my late 20s, early 30s. I've only just started my career at that point. I want to have kids, but then how much time can I take off to be a mother? How much, or a father? And then how difficult is it then to go back into the industry? And I think that's an issue still across the board. It's crazy to say that in 2024 that that's still a problem, but it really is. And I even took to social media over the last weekend on Mother's Day to make a point of this, of if you can give your parents grace, give them a chance to say, hey, look, your child's sick, take the day, take them to the hospital, do
Yeah.
what you need to do, you're going to get that grace back. I know when I've
Oh,
had a more flexible work environment, I've been more loyal, I've turned up and I've put my effort in as much as possible. And I think we need to get that mindset across to the way the Americans particularly deal with the space industry of, we work long hours, we really do. There are very few launches that happen between 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So if you're
right.
working in the launch industry, you're not going to be working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. You're going to be working evenings, weekends, night shifts. You're going to be working on holidays. That's just the way it works. But if a company approaches it right and they nurture their workforce, I think they will do much better. And I certainly hope we're going to see that shift going forward. I like to think that the pandemic did open up one great opportunity to most companies, and that's the idea of having more flexibility of working from home. And you work from home,
Yeah.
Sarah, right?
Yes, that is correct. Because a lot of the work, well, when I'm speaking, I'm on a stage. Very
Yeah.
often that's at a venue, but there are also online conferences, and the rest of the work I'm doing it from here. It doesn't require me to always be there, which can save the client costs. It saves both of us time, but it is a different way of working. So again, it's
Yeah.
learning how it works for you, and not everybody is well suited to that. But it does. What I have seen, because also coming from the aviation background, you can now attract talent from a different city without them having to go and uproot their family or come and move to the Bay Area where it's outrageously expensive, right? And they can
Mhm.
stay in Portland where they want to be outside and do these other types of activities. And, it opens up the door for a lot of different talent to come in the door. And I think that's really great. But I do agree with you that not just for maternity leave, but in general, when I left the US over 15 years ago, was dubbed the no vacation nation. And
Yeah.
it's still to a large extent that way. People will never not take a single vacation, or excuse me, sick day. They're not late. They work overtime. And then in their annual review, they were excessively absent because they took their allotted 2 weeks, which is also a pittance of leave. And that it's treated, people are being treated like chattel, like, okay, we're just going to get you through. Someone else wants your job. So either you do it or get out. And I've heard that way too many times. And that is also why we're not retaining not just women, but top talent, why people are going to different companies, realizing, hey, you also have a toxic environment. Oh, this is broken too. Great. I'm going to go somewhere else so I have a higher quality of life. And as we look at the next generations coming in, money is not the only currency they're looking at. They
No.
don't want a boatload of money to enjoy when they have a heart problem at 40 and all of these other things. They want a flexible lifestyle. They want health. They want time. So there's a lot of shifts that are taking place kind of all at once as this new space economy is evolving.
Absolutely. And I think, the focus on mental health has started to really come to the forefront of that as well.
Yeah.
It's not just about having time for family, but we burn out. I've done jobs where I've worked 18 hours a day, which is crazy when I
Yeah.
think back and think I just did that to myself. But I was passionate
Right.
about the job. So I put myself out there and did it. You can't sustain that long period of time, and yet I would sometimes be doing those kind of shifts and then coming in and finding another pile of work on my desk and being like, well, you put the effort in yesterday. Can you continue that today? And we
Right.
need to be better at giving people grace and opportunity to really take that time to have that mental health break as much as a physical health break. Because I think that's really important. And I certainly see it more and more in the space industry. I mean, SpaceX is notorious for working their people 80, 90 hours a week. And I'm sure for a majority of them, they're happy to be there. They're happy to do it. They
Yeah.
love the work they're doing. But there is a certain level of when you can't do that anymore. You have to have
Just
balance in
because you
life.
love it doesn't mean that it's sustainable.
Hmm.
I also like
Absolutely.
my work method, my work ethic, my high performing drive. I am often doing just 70%, and other people are looking at me like, "How are you doing all of these things?" And I'm like, "What do you mean, how am I doing all of these things? I've slowed way down. Like, this is cruisy," right? But everybody's got different bandwidths. And even if you love it, you cannot sustain that high level for a long period of time and maintain the performance that you want to, because
Absolutely.
the latest sleep research is showing that if you're only sleeping 6 hours a night for 10 days in a row, that's like being up for 24 hours for your system. So your cognitive function is down. Your reaction time is going to be down. Your ability to make sound decisions, right? All of these things are affected. And so we're now getting the science to support what we've suspected and seen, right? And there's a lot of new conversations. Aviation is having a really big conversation right now. The ARC was just published by the FAA, new pathways for, mental health support and not just an immediate revocal of a license, because mental health does not mean mental illness. I think that's
No.
another thing that people have wrong is I really loved Heidi Hanna was a speaker at a conference I was also speaking at earlier in the year. She's like, it's just brain performance. Do you want your brain to perform well or not? That's what mental health is. Just like your
Yeah.
body, physical health, your brain can also have these optimum or suboptimal levels. And so it's about knowing how to operate here without breaking all the rest of the systems, because a lot of the things that do present, it's actually not even a disorder or an illness. It's just literally your brain doing what it's supposed to do to protect you. And we're not taking all of that into account. So it's really, as well as you said, companies, right? Companies need to support this.
Yeah.
Individuals also need to exert their own boundaries. And that's not something necessarily that the boomer and Gen X or the millennial generation was taught, right? So there's a boundary song little kids sing now. And I was like, I like this song. I'm going to sing this song now as an adult. I wish I had that song when I was a child.
Yeah, there is definitely a need for boundaries, and I certainly have learned. I mean, I only started this job at T minus about a year ago, and it was about, I'd got to the breaking point in my mental health where I was working, 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 and I thought I just need something that's going to give me comfort. And I that's why I love working from home. I've got more flexibility here, and I know there are days, and I'm a workaholic by nature. That's part of my problem. It's why I
Yeah.
fit in so well here in America. But I know that I need to have that balance more, and I've had to sort of stop myself and say, let's slow it down. Let's do some meditation. I think you said before that you do a bit of yoga and meditation as well to sort of find that
Yes.
balance in your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I started, I used to hate yoga. Okay. Back in the day, this is too slow and what? And then I found this teacher where he blended a few different kind of traditional styles into this flow where the beginning was very young. It was this powerful movement and you are getting the energy out, and then you slow down and you might hold a posture for longer and you focus on the breathing and all of this. So by the end of it, I feel like I'm this towel that's just been like twisted out, like
Mhm.
physically, mentally, emotionally, and I am so calm after it. And a lot of people think meditation is emptying the mind. That is literally not possible because you're a human being. There was going to be something happening in there, but it's about focusing the mind. Are you focusing on your breath? If your mind wanders, bring it back. Maybe you're focusing on the sun, and so all the thoughts that pop in, you want to direct them to thoughts about the sun. That's another specific type of meditation. So there's different forms. There's moving meditations. If you go for a walk, right, and you find what works for you, but the thing is we can get addicted to stress and
Yeah.
solving problems, right? Like if we're good at putting out fires, we will literally create fires to put them out. So we get the dopamine and, endorphin rush. And then we're like in this cycle. And Heidi Hanna talks about that in her book, The Sharp Solution. And it was really cool the way she laid it out very simply to come back to communication, some of these science concepts, neuroscience, in a very simple, digestible format. And I actually felt my brain relax reading this book, which you
Mhm.
might think, how does that happen when you're reading, something that might be science heavy? Because of the way she laid it out. She communicated the idea so simply and so well, and purposely didn't overload with unnecessary information. Like, I don't need to know the receptor and why and see all the studies necessarily, right? If I'm just wanting to achieve this result, this is what I can do. Here's a basic background. And if you want to learn more, there's the resource of where you go find it. And I thought it was really ingenious what she had done, because it was the first neuroscience book I'd ever read like that.
That's super cool. That kind of pretty much covers how we approach our podcast, our daily news. It's, my company's N2K, news to knowledge, but I don't want to overwhelm people. Don't want to get into the weeds of it all. What I've learned is that
Right.
people in the space industry are really good at focusing on their little area of what it is that they specialize in, but don't necessarily know
Yeah.
about what everyone else is doing around them. So Maria, who's our host, and I, we describe it as like a tapas of news or a meze, a little bit of information, but then we link to further stories. If you want to go and
Right.
dig into this, if you want to get into the weeds, you want to go technical, here's a link to go and read further information about it. Go, and we encourage people to do that. But, I try to
Right.
keep it light and airy and keep it as accessible as possible, knowing that I might have the CEO of a very engineering focused company, or I might have a space wrench, or I might have somebody who's a student who wants to get into the space industry. I've got to make
Yeah.
sure whatever my messaging is can cover all of those, which I think is key.
Absolutely. And for those of you who don't know what this podcast is, I've just popped up the link on the screen there for you. We'll put it in the comments as well. But it is wonderful. I listen to it,
Thank you.
and it is very easy to digest, and it's interesting and it's informative. And I don't find myself, zoning out because we're getting too into the weeds. And that's what's really important when we talk about science communication, and that's across the board, whether it's space or anything. I did also, might have been, I forget who said this, but they basically said that if you cannot explain this concept in a simple way, like to a 5-year-old or to a teenager, then you don't understand it well enough yourself. And
Yeah.
I think that is something that people maybe fight against, because they want to show how complex it is and how smart they are, and like, look at how cool this is, and they don't want to detract from that. But at the same time, if you can't spread the idea, that can sit on a shelf and not get utilized to its full extent.
That's the old dumbing down versus reach it out argument that I know is like 101 for marketing. And certainly it's a problem that we need to overcome when it comes to the space industry. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a rocket engineer, and I've sat in rooms full of them, and they do have that misconception of they are the smartest people in the room. And I do think we get a lot of type A personalities that do that.
A lot of
And I
ego.
used to think of myself as being a type A personality, but I've learned I'm actually really good with a good leader. I'm a good deputy. That's my personality type. I like people that are in control, and I like to support that leadership role. But yeah, I found a lot of them think they're the smartest person in the room, and yet they haven't really thought about how they communicate it. And the way that I really dumb it down for them is we take the
I love it.
Edison argument of, I've invented a light bulb and I do a really good job telling everyone how important that light bulb is, and Tesla, that nobody really knew about when he was alive and how much he invented. It wasn't until his death, and
Right.
really the likes of Elon Musk pointing a point of what Tesla managed to do during his life that made you go, you could have the smartest idea in the room, but if you're not able to tell people about it, then nobody's going to
Right.
know. You can't just
Absolutely.
expect the industry to find you by haphazard. Oh, I might need this random part for my ship. No, it doesn't work that
No.
way. You've got to be able to tell people why that part's important, how it fits to them. And that's where I think we're starting to see that shift. We are starting to see more communications coming in. We're seeing more companies employ their own in-house people. We're seeing more of these specialized PR firms turning up all over the world. And I'm really encouraging it. So the more I see people around me that are doing space communications, the more I want to pull them up. And so I'm reaching
Yeah.
out to them saying, hey, let's be friends. Let's talk about this. Let's see how we can work together, because I think that's really important. We can't do things in silos. That goes across the
No.
board. So the more we can help
Absolutely.
each other raise up and say, okay, that's your area, that's your piece of the pie. And that's how it should work. It should always be about supporting each other and making sure that everybody has access. And space is for everybody. It really is key to everyday life. I think I read somewhere, and I've been kicking myself because I've never found the article again. It was so well written as well, where you use about 27 satellites a day without realizing it, whether it's going on
Wow.
your cell phone. Yes, I know, everything from your space your weather app even every single morning, which I always check my weather app first thing in the morning. What's the temperature going to be today? Do I need to hide from the wind here in southern New Mexico because we're notorious for it in spring? Or if it's using your cell phone, you might be pinging off a satellite above you, whether you're watching the television. And I think the more we start to communicate, not just how important satellites are, but I know you mentioned it earlier about the developments in everyday life, like baby formula, even things like your gym. We're talking about health. I always say to students, who do you think, came up with the concept of having a static bike? It was actually because we needed to keep astronauts moving in space and they didn't have the room to just cycle around. So they came up with the static bike idea for exercise.
Wow.
Huge deal, right? Because then all of a sudden that's commercialized and now everybody goes to a gym and they sit on a bike. It's a huge thing that people don't recognize happens on a daily basis. It's not just the GPS
Right.
on your phone. It's not just the GPS in your car. It's everything. And we need to
Yeah.
do a better job. And the only way we can do that is by bringing more people in and saying, hey, you communicate to this group, I'll communicate to that group. Because
Right.
I think communications over the last 20 years have become far more difficult than when we were growing up. We used to go
Mm.
to the news, it'd be, well, I was growing up in England, it was 4 channels. That's all we had growing up. So you knew you'd
Yeah.
pick the news of one of those 4 channels, and that's how you got your information on the daily basis. Nowadays, there are hundreds of thousands of channels you can pick from around the world. You've got your cell phone that's coming up with different things. People do not get one source of information anymore. So being able to communicate to them on multiple levels takes a massive village. So I really hope and encourage more people to start thinking about that. And I always say to a lot of people that I work with in the space industry, it's not all about just your communicators either. Sometimes your best
Mm.
communicator could be your CEO. It could be your CTO. It could even be an engineer on your team. Don't have to think about it having to fit a box constantly. It's
Right.
actually everybody's role to be able to communicate what you do. And you've got to look at whose strengths and how you kind of make them better and encourage that. Make sure you've got the support behind them to say, you know what, you're really good at what you do. Let's encourage that as we go forward. And hopefully we can get more people then starting to understand why space is so important to everyday life here on Earth.
I love that. And what a great company culture as well to have everybody so bought in that and trained that they can explain what that company is about and what they're doing. Doesn't matter if they're cleaning the floors. I mean, I think there's a common story of, you know, I've heard it in many variations, but someone is like, "Oh, well, what do you do?" Is like, "Oh, I help put people on the moon."
Yeah.
And the person's the mopping the floors. That's an
Hmm.
integral part of that operation to make that other thing happen, right? And so getting people to understand that they're not just laying the brick, but they're building the cathedral is really a big part of the culture. And also many different communication styles are needed because we consume in different ways. We've got
Hmm.
different generations, different cultures, different understanding. And I think the most important thing is too, talking about the ego, right? We have to be able to communicate this information of the importance of it, why it's important, how it affects you in your day-to-day life, how it affects society without also being condescending. Because that can
Amen.
also happen. I have been around people who, and they assume that others do not know or understand or have the education or the training, etc. And so they start talking in this very condescending way. Meanwhile, this person might even be above them in level or expertise or something. And so you have to also be able to do it in a way that gets me excited, right? Like
Yeah.
get me excited so I want to learn more, so that I ask more questions, because that's going to be then I'm going to go home and I'm going to finish this podcast and I'm going to go tell somebody else about it. And that's how things spread. And you mentioned like the stationary bike, it's been commercialized. That's another thing. If you're building something that is wonderful and powerful technology, but there's very little commercial application, you also it has to be revolutionary in some way if it can't be commercialized beyond its space use, right? There's so many facets of what people are looking at when you're getting funding, when you're going for grants, when you're going to, get buy-in, and people fail to recognize that because they're just so into the science, which is probably
Hmm.
amazing. But if I can't understand that, then, I'm not going to buy it. I'm not going to fund you. I'm not going to vote for it. All of those things come into play.
You'd think that space communications would be naturally sexy as well. But
Mm.
we are, as if you look at any kids, you tell them about space and they're excited and they get,
Oh my God. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. There are very few people that don't understand the awe of space when you were young. And, one of the thing I used to talk to a lot of parents about was, one of the things that I enjoy about communicating with the youth over is that they get that we live on a planet. And there's this point in life where I don't know when it happens. I'd love to know exactly where it is, where you forget that. You forget that you
Yeah.
live on a planet. So that you need to understand about space because we live in space. It's all around us.
Yes. We are
Like
literally
such a
hurtling through
simple
space
thing.
right now.
Yeah,
We are all on
exactly.
a spaceship. It's called Earth. And that's
It's
also why
bonkers,
we need
isn't
to
it?
communicate. Oh, it's so funny. And you know what? Reframing that. So I'm going to be after this podcast starting Space Kind 13 has started. And so I'm a
Uh-huh.
group lead for the training. That's a space leadership program. But the idea is that we are crew of Spaceship Earth and we need to communicate and understand each other like crew. If I'm going to go to space with 5 other people, I need to have the ability to communicate with them because I might be responsible for saving their life. They might be responsible for saving my life. And we're going to be in very close quarters for a long period of time. So if I don't know how to communicate and they're just breathing wrong and it annoys me, right? Like that literally happens in analog missions. That literally
Mhm.
happens when I haven't had a snack and I'm a little bit irritated because my partner hasn't done something. And all of a sudden it's like, can you go breathe over there? Right?
Mhm.
Like we have to be able to overcome these funny human things that we do, not just when we're in a spaceship, not just when we're in a cockpit of an aircraft, but when we're in every single daily life. Because at the end of the day, like we haven't done very well doing that so far. And look at the state of our planet. Look at how it's not healthy. The systems are out of whack, right? We're not communicating well across borders, across industries, across generations. We have some work to do. And it's important that we understand how powerful communication is. It's not this like woo woo, touchy feely stuff. It's actually critical to survival.
I do think that's one area that I think space has done particularly well, though, is this cross communication with. I mean, you just got to look at the International Space Station. What a marvel that is of
Oh,
having
yes.
these astronauts that collaborate across countries. And
Yes.
we
That
all
is incredible.
know Yeah, we all know that a lot of these astronauts come back from their experience in space, having them experienced what
Right.
Frank White has coined as the overview effect, this
Yeah.
idea of us having reconnected to our planet, realizing how fragile it is, and seeing that there is no such thing as borders. That's just a human thing that we've put and drawn on a map. We are one race, and that we need to do better at kind of including all of that. And that's again going back to that diversity argument. We need to make sure that we have a full representation of everybody when it comes to our approach to space. And I do hope, and I do think it's starting to permeate, but I do hope we get better. We need to do better,
Yeah.
and hopefully things will start to change and get more inclusive as we start to progress with this.
Yeah. And some of it is also generational, right?
Yeah.
And space is highly regulated, just like aviation. It does largely descend from a military application. And so we have a certain way of being, a certain mindset that comes along with that. And it's not that that's wrong. It's just how do we work together? How do we meet each other where we're at? How do we cooperate? How do we take what really works from all styles of communication, all forms of working together and meld them together to continue to improve, just like science, right? We get new variables, we test, we see what the best solution is, and then we go from there. And so when we look at older generations, they one didn't grow up in an environment that allowed it, right? It was all about
Mhm.
safety, like world wars and industrial revolution, but they were not given the tools. Like our consciousness awareness level has shifted, right? We now are much more aware of things than we were in the past. So how do we continue to, go in that direction? How do we continue to break down the barriers and understand we're not the only species on this planet that matters, right? There
Absolutely.
there are all sorts of, and I made the argument once, like, why do we need mosquitoes? They're pretty annoying. Right? Like maybe we could do without those, but they are an integral part of the ecosystem that would affect other things, right? And so understanding how our choices impact, what is that ripple effect? So many people think I'm just one person. How does that matter? Well, when we communicate it correctly and we get the buy-in, we can have huge impact, right? And so that's why this is so important, especially from a science point of view. And that's not just space science.
No, I think you've absolutely nailed it there. And that's certainly something that I've tried to encourage people that I've come across that are starting to come up in their careers. I've been involved in the Spaceport America Cup, which is the world's largest intercollegiate rocket engineering competition since
Wow,
2018. And one of the things
that's
that I
cool.
say to all the teams is, yeah, super cool, amazing competition. Go look it up. You can look up the nonprofit that runs it as well, called soundingrocket.org. They're incredible. And they do this just to encourage the next generation of people that are going to come through the industry. But one of the things I always go to the teams is like, okay, so what are you studying? They're like, well, engineering, astrophysicists, whatever it is that they come up with. I'm like, so how many of you are business? And they're like, what? I'm like, well, how did you raise your money? Oh, we really struggled with raising money this year. I'm like, well, why did you not go to a business person in your university
Right.
and say, come and be part of this team? Why don't you go to your communications? But, start to build this idea of it's not just about being an engineer or a scientist to
Mm.
work on this. You need to start bringing more and more in. And I think we're starting to see it. The last couple of years, they've brought in competitions where they're doing live streaming this year, so that the rockets are going to be
Cool.
launching and they're going to live stream the launch. The cameras on
Yeah.
board, it's going to be crazy, and encouraging people to start to see that. They've done video competitions where the teams are introducing themselves and talking about their concept, and they've started to bring in more and more people with different backgrounds to be able to help them do that. So I'm
Love
hoping,
that.
it starts from the ground up. This is the next generation coming up and through. And I think they
Yes.
start to see that actually they're equal parts needed for making this whole competition to work. It's not just having the idea of how to build a rocket, it's how you communicate that build, how you
Yeah.
communicate what it is you're trying to do that makes it key to them winning. So yeah, if anybody's interested, it's a really great competition. I do the live stream for it every year out in the desert, which
Ooh,
is crazy. It's good fun, really good
amazing.
fun. It's all a load of
Yeah, no, it
volunteers that
sounds
turn up
fun.
and just launch rockets. Yeah, come. It's in June. Here in southern New Mexico, they hold it at Spaceport America. There's
Okay.
152 teams from over 20 countries that come out and do it
Wow.
every year. It's amazing. So it's the only time in your life you'll get to see 150 launches over 3 days. And obviously they're just smaller sounding rockets, but still, you still get the fun of the lift off and seeing it go up in the air and watching it come back down with parachute if all things go to plan. So yeah, it's a really great way of encouraging the next generations to think about how to approach things. And the idea is that we hope to see the future Elon Musk's, Jeff Bezos. I mean, admittedly,
Right.
neither of those are actually engineers, but people that are entrepreneurs are going to make that shift in the industry to see how things are progressing forward. And if we can get them to understand how space should be inclusive and how your business model should include everybody from different backgrounds, then I think we're going to start to see more of that come through to the industry as we progress forward.
Yes, absolutely. And to your point about business being super important, you know, the leaders of these space organizations are not necessarily doing the same deep level of science and engineering that they're employing others to do, but they know how to get the funding. They have built other businesses that can bring in the funding. They know how to build a business and bring things to commercialization and scale them. And that is crucial for these technologies to be able to be tested, to be able to be seen by the right person who can then help make that connection or fund you or bring you to the next level. And that's why it's so important to be able to have these kind of competitions where we're bringing those best minds together, and there's going to be people there probably almost like scouting for talent, but also
Oh, yes.
teaching them the skills to communicate, right? And bringing awareness around these types of opportunities, because we need all of it, right? We definitely
Yeah.
do. And we can nurture these skill sets and we can nurture where people shine, and then bring in those right people. Like you said, you don't have to be the one doing the science to be the voice. And you don't have to
Not at
necessarily
all.
be in the leadership position to be the voice. But if you have that charismatic, magnetic personality and you draw people in and you can get them excited about something, those are the voices we need in the industry. And so, we want you. If you were watching this
We need
podcast,
you.
we need you. Go and check out this thing. I just checked out the weekend, and I'm like thinking I already have an event on the weekend, but maybe I can come for the first few days, if anything, just to geek out. I mean,
Yeah,
And who knows what happens, it's those are the kind of spaces that you want to be in, pun very much intended, because when you can go somewhere and your passion's ignited and you're excited, that's going to draw people in and that's going to lead to conversation. And then that might lead to the next opportunity.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's absolutely key. And, the more people we can get involved in the industry, the better. So I encourage everybody. And that's, it goes back to that whole communication thing. I try and encourage a lot of people coming into the industry, no matter where you are in your career outside of it, to reach out. The more people that
Yeah.
ask me questions, I mean, I don't have a traditional story of this is what I wanted to do for my whole life and this is how I got it
Yeah.
you know so I encourage people to reach out on places like LinkedIn. Make sure that you are speaking to the right people, paying attention to what's going on around you. Ask how do I get my way in? And it isn't easy. I'm not going to pretend that there are hundreds and hundreds of jobs available and you can just walk straight through the door, but there are always opportunities. And sometimes you have to kind of be creative with those opportunities, whether you go and
Yeah.
volunteer for an event like Spaceport America Cup, or whether you turn up to some of these conferences that go on around the country or around the world and say,
Right.
hey, how do I get involved? This is me. I'm interested in this. This is my passion.
Yeah.
Where's most of my skill transfer across? And I do encourage more and more people to start thinking, put yourself out there, be a bit more
Yeah.
accessible, and hopefully things will work out.
Absolutely. And I mean, they have the on Netflix that documentary A Million Miles Away, right? Where the person was just so dedicated and they step by step got their qualifications up, got the education they needed, got the pilot hours, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually, it happened. And so there's something to be said about perseverance. And when we talk about passion, I mean, the root of the word, it's Latin, it means to suffer, right? So it's what are you willing to suffer for? Like if you love this thing, if you are excited about this, you're willing to volunteer your time. You're willing to take the no's until you get the yes and learn along the way. I mean, I don't have a traditional space story either. I mean, yes, I was obsessed with space since I was little. My first two words were literally star and airplane. But I went in the airplane direction. And I, didn't ever think I would work in the space industry, particularly when I was based in Asia. It was very unlikely that I would be joining a different nationality's space agency, and there weren't really regional offices over there. Um, but I only came into the space industry really a year ago. I met Dr. Cyan Proctor in February, and then I met Loretta Whitesides with Space Kind in March, and then I decided to take Space Kind, and that talk about instant community. That when I went to the Analog Astronaut Conference, the first days, everyone was like, "Who's Space Kind?" And I had 30 immediate new people that I could be really close to because we went through this similar type of training. And there's the over 500 alum. Their mission is to get over 1 million people through the training. It's not too late to sign up for SpaceKind 13, by the way, till noon Pacific time today, May 14th. You can still jump in. Um, but that's of a relatively short time. So last year I went to the Analog Astronaut Conference, and this year I was emceeing, because I
Amazing.
put my hand up and said, this is cool. I'm having so much fun with these people. And what can I do next year? How can I be involved? And then it led to this opportunity. And so people will recognize that. And so go to where you're interested in, even if you don't know what the heck is going on there, and learn and ask questions. And you'll meet really cool people along the way. And like you said, it's not going to always be easy. It's not always going to be straightforward. Sometimes you do a few little detours and pivots and pirouettes along the way, and then you find somewhere that, hey, this feels good. I'm getting some momentum here. Let me explore this a little bit further.
Yeah, it goes back to that wonder and discovery that we started our whole conversation about. Go back
Yeah.
to it. Go rediscover your wonder. Ask questions and figure things out. You never know what could happen.
Absolutely. And when you tap into that wonder and awe, that is what other people also notice, right? And it can be it doesn't have to be something so grandiose as space either. It can be like, wow, look at these flowers that are blooming. It's springtime. What kind of flower is this? I come from a different state. I don't know what this is. And just even having that's infectious, right? And then that's going to lead you
Mhm.
to seeing more. And when we live in that space of awe, we also stop getting so caught up in our stories, our human stories of, you know, we're so important and these problems are so massive, we can start to recognize there's so many things happening around us that are incredible. I love seeing those memes where it's like the Milky Way galaxy and it's like a little arrow, like you are a tiny dot
You're there.
here,
Yeah,
right? And then it always makes me go, yeah, this problem's not really a problem. And in a month, am I going to
so
even
true.
remember it? Probably not. So let me go outside for a little bit.
I'm hoping that's
What
what
a
people got from, this year seeing the eclipse and seeing the Northern Lights that we saw and
oh
experienced this last
yeah,
weekend. I'm hoping that's what's gonna help ground a lot of people and make them
I hope
remember.
so too. I mean,
Yeah,
seeing the Northern Lights in Arizona, I thought I was gonna have to go to
biggie.
Alaska or Finland or something, and I probably still will, but like I literally squealed like a little kid. And I
Bless
was
you.
surrounded by a bunch of space people who were also squealing and like so excited and we're all out there to experience it. So, it's pretty incredible. And what are some of the things I want to ask you that you do in your life that bring in that wonder and discovery on a day-to-day basis?
Oh. I think, rather than on a day-to-day basis, certainly I spent a lot of my 20s traveling and that
Mm,
really fed my curiosity and wonder. We've talked about this before. I lived in the Middle East. I was really lucky there to be able to travel all over
yeah.
Asia, and immerse myself in cultures that I probably wouldn't normally be exposed to. And I think that sparked an interest in me and an understanding of people. And that certainly is something that I encourage people to do, is to immerse themselves into different areas. Obviously, I'm not from here, believe it or not, but the accent does just definitely gives me away. I became an American in 2020. Even living in this culture, it's so different to where I grew up. It's so different from where I lived in the Middle East. So I think that understanding of people, ask questions. I'm always like, ask away, ask things, but also immerse yourself. I think that's so important. I live in a small area in southern New Mexico. It's actually the birthplace of space, I'll add. Down here in Las Cruces, it's where the first V2 rockets were launched, by the government back in the 1940s. Um, and yet nobody in this area knows anything about the space history. They've launched more objects to suborbital space than anywhere else in the US territories. They've had all sorts of military programs that have started off here. It's where NASA used to bring their astronauts before they went to the moon to do a lot of testing in our volcanic mare areas. So I started a festival called the Las Cruces Space Festival. It's a non-profit that I did in
Cool.
collaboration with some friends that work in the space industry to encourage people around here to learn about that history and own it a bit, but also then to talk about why space is important to their everyday lives. So I kind of wove it in a sort of subversive way to get them to encourage it more. And that's really my little wonder and awe thing. The more I learn about the history, the more I learn about what's happening, and I do that purely on the side. It's not paid, and I've never been paid to do any of it. I
Mm,
just do it because I enjoy it, and I think educating is such an important thing, and getting people access to space is such an important thing. I want to make
yes.
sure that we do more as a community to get people to who come from non-traditional space backgrounds to have access to things that they might never have had the opportunity to do. So that's really my day-to-day awe and wonder.
Amazing. And there's so many ways to cultivate it and, that giving back as well, that volunteering that also can bring in that awe and wonder because you're part of something bigger than just you, right? You're contributing your time and your energy and your vitality to this thing and bringing in that next generation and getting them excited, and that's often very energy giving, right? Because
Yeah,
you're seeing their minds open and they get so excited. And there was a little kid at the Analog Astronaut Conference. His name was Isaac, and he actually they put on the first kids like EVA suit and walked around in it, and it was so cool. He was living his best life. He's also super cute,
bless.
mop of curly hair, and his dad is awesome. Um, but, like, I remember going to the planetarium with my mom when I was little and asking all these questions and, sitting in the seminars and no, I didn't did I pay attention to the seminars? No, it was over my head, but I was with my kids' book and I would go to the exhibits and do all these things and, it just gave me a different sense of wonder about things, and so there's many ways that we can do it that don't necessarily need to cost money, It don't
Yeah.
necessarily mean you have to go travel. I mean, Mark Wagner was showing us SLU, you can get a SLU subscription, and it's the satellites from Chile and from Australia and from wherever they're based, and telescopes, and you're getting the footage and getting to choose, like, I want to see Jupiter, I want to see this
Wow.
star. And then, when the telescope will be in that direction, it'll take the picture and you'll be able to see it. So even if you're in a different part of the globe, your northern hemisphere, you can see these things from the southern hemisphere. It's wild. I mean, I
Yeah.
was also out over this the whole weekend, and it's very inexpensive. It's like less than $10 a month or something like that. And for like school subscriptions, they even have it, it's less, there's a small amount per kid. And this means that you could have your classroom looking at real-time space images without having to have a telescope and come back at night to stare up at the night sky.
Well,
Right.
Sarah,
So
have you
there's
ever found Send TV? I'm going to put you
yes,
down a
I'm
hole.
talking to Charles. I'm talking to Charles
Yeah.
on Wednesday. He came in, he spoke on Earth Flight Foundation hosted Earth Space Day with Frank White. Charles was there with Sen. We had several other speakers, Greg Autry and Michelle Hanlon. And, we were talking about this concept, like Earth is in space. Earth and space are part of the same system. They're not separate. And so
Mhm.
Frank White was at the first Earth Day event in the 70s. And he's like, now I'm here at the first Earth Space Day. And I was like, this is so cool.
Aw, that
So,
is really
but yes,
cool.
Sen has incredible SE, and I'll pop it up. Um,
Yeah.
and
They're
they
hopefully
have
gonna go live with their new camera. I think it's already up there. It went up with
yeah,
the
the
last
4K.
resupply mission. Yes, I'm so
Yeah.
excited when that goes live. And that all started, do you know Liam Kennedy, who works for
Yes.
Charles? He does
Yes.
the ISS above. I found one of those, bought one for the spaceport, and I would spend hours just watching that image from ISS above, just absolutely
Mhm.
blown away by. And it's weird, isn't it? You're looking at Earth, but you're seeing it from an
Yeah.
vantage point you'll never see. Well, the likelihood
Right.
of most people seeing is quite slim. So it is quite incredible to find yourself just sort of staring in awe and going, "Wow, we just live on this tiny little planet, and we've got
Yeah.
these things whizzing around us at 17,500 miles per hour above our heads." And it's crazy. But yeah, definitely when that goes
Yeah.
to live, I think that's going to be a real awe and wonder. And I believe it's a free service that you can just go and
Yes,
watch
you
it
can
anytime.
already go
So
onto YouTube right now and see
yeah,
all sorts of different footage that they have. Watching the eclipse from the sun
yeah.
footage was so cool because it's this like dark spot going across the earth, and you're like, well, I feel like if you put some music of like Game of Thrones to it or something, it could be really ominous. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing. So definitely go and check that out. So
Mhm.
see, we brought some awe and wonder today with this podcast
Yeah,
to
we did.
everybody as we talked about all of these different ways of how space intersects media and the importance of science communication. So thank you for having fun with me today. Before we sign off, I want to ask you a few quick questions I like to ask all my guests. So the first one is, what do you think your superpower is?
I really thought on that, and I did think I'm just human. I don't think I have a superpower, but I think I'm going to be a little bit controversial and say my superpower is being a mum. The fact that I managed to have children and recreate my career and still be a good mum and still be present to them, I think is definitely a superhuman part of me. It's about the only superhuman part. There are some days when I wonder how I'm functioning because I've dealt with soccer games in the
Yes,
evenings.
all moms are superheroes.
Yeah, yeah, I do think there's certain level of having to be a bit superhero and superpowerish about doing that. So yeah, just gonna say being a mom. That's my
Yeah,
superpower.
no, absolutely. Mothers out there are superheroes, particularly when you have multiple little ones, and you've made sure that we've survived, right? Toddlers. My one friend described having a toddler, particularly her boy, as you are running around trying to make sure that they don't off themselves because they are just
True.
getting into everything, right? They're just so curious, but they have no concept or awareness of danger or anything. So thank you for doing those superhero things for your children and for the students that you work with, because I know that comes across there too.
I hope so. Surrogate mother work.
It is. So the second question is, who's on your personal board of directors? Now, this could be people in your immediate circle that you do actually have conversations with. They could be people that you don't know. Maybe you know someone famous, but you adopt their lens at which to look through life, just as a filter to kind of analyze your situation, alive or passed away from the past, or even an avatar or character or something like that. Who would you say would be on that personal board of directors for you?
That's a really cool question. Had to think about this one. So I think my executive director would have to be my husband, Adam. He is my champion and enables me to do a lot of what I do. Enables me to go off and do conferences wherever I want to, and takes over being the superhuman at home. So that he's definitely my executive director, and everything I do and everything I question, he's my first person, my confidant that I bounce ideas off of. The second person that I'm going to name is Joe Bullington, who's a really good friend of mine who works at Jacobs. He established the Last Cruise of Space Festival, and has been very much a mentor for me as I've gone through my career, and just an incredible nice person who'll give you the time of day. He's very humble and has shown me that he really has opened up the idea of space to me, which I think I am forever grateful for. So he's another one. I'm trying to think who else I'd have on there. Probably Christina Korp. I don't know if you know
Mhm.
Christina, but she's known as the astronaut wrangler. She and I
Okay.
have only met in person maybe once, but I'm an absolute awe of her career. She's come from, she was a performer, and then worked for Buzz Aldrin as
Mm.
his manager for a long time, and now works with Aim Higher Foundation, which does a lot of really great stuff in the space community to again bring people from a non-traditional space background to get excited about space. So I absolutely adore her and love her work, and definitely would have her on my board, along with Michelle Lucas from Higher Orbits, who does a lot of really great education outreach across the country, and I'm a big fan of what they do as well. So I've got a lot of women on there now. I need to balance it out with another man. Brandon Carruth, my boss, he'd definitely be on my board. Brandon is one of the smartest people I know. He's from a military background. He is the vice president of N2K, and I think he's probably one of the smartest people I know. But he doesn't come into a room ever and make out as if he's the smartest person in the room, which I think is quite a wonderful characteristic of having somebody who's that smart and incredible. And then the last person I'm going to add in there is Dr. Bill Gutman, who has been part of the Spaceport America team since conception, essentially. He wrote way back when the whole idea of having a spaceport in New Mexico, and has worked tirelessly on this project for years and does incredible STEM education outreach, but does it in a way that makes it accessible to everyone, and has inspired me when I worked alongside him, and continues to inspire me even though he's semi-retired now. So he'd definitely be on my board of directors as well.
I love that. Thank you for giving them a shout out, and hopefully they'll be able to see this and know the impact that they had. It's really special when we can be able to feel that a little bit, right? When someone that made an impact, because they may not always know that they made an impact.
Mm-hmm.
I
It's
just
true.
watched a video the other day of Adele on stage. I don't know for what, but someone else got up and asked her a question of, was there a teacher that really impacted you? And she mentioned this teacher, and they brought her out. They like had researched and knew it was this person, and they brought her to the event without Adele knowing. And then it was like a montage of this happening a few times, and I was crying by the end of it. Actually, about 10
I always
seconds in,
cry
I
those
was crying,
times.
but it was very touching. And so to
Yeah.
be able to share that is wonderful. But yes, I love the diversity in there at the end. You're like, wait a second, there's got to be
There's
another
got to be more.
perspective. Yeah.
And my
Um,
space girls, they know who they are if they're watching. They know.
okay.
They're my
Awesome. Yes,
they're my
everybody.
my go-to when you text somebody and you think, "Oh gosh, I'm having
Yes.
one of those days," and they get you. Yeah, they know who they are. They're on my
Yeah.
text group.
Everybody has their little immediate space crew that they can go to for their venting or for their processing,
Absolutely.
and they're Jedi listening, as we would call it in space kind. All right. So final question, self-awareness question. An alien has come to Earth and they meet you. So what do they learn about humanity because they've met you?
Oh goodness, what do I want people to know when they meet me? They're really what it comes down to, isn't it? That
Yeah.
I
Yeah. 'Cause how do you best represent, the humanness, but those are your qualities.
I think kindness, that to me is something
Mm,
that I always try to put across as my first quality. I try to be kind to everybody and
mm,
understanding and empathetic as much as possible. So I do think I'd hope that if I ever came across, I was listening to an interview with Avi Loeb recently, the astrophysicist who's from Harvard, and he was talking about why scientists need to be the people that manage. If we were ever to come into contact with intelligence and life out there, there's a good chance. We know there's definitely going to be life out there somewhere. Whether they're intelligent or not is another question. But it
right.
shouldn't be led by the governments. And my
I
background is as a
know.
journalist working for Al Jazeera. I can tell you the last person you want is a politician to deal with an alien life form. So I
Mm-mm.
like to think that the kindness of how I would approach them, rather than going in thinking they're hostile, I'd like to hope that that's what I would try and push for. And curious. I'd like to think
Yeah.
that they wouldn't think I'm curious, because I am. I'm naturally a curious person when I meet people, and hopefully they'd get that from me as a human race, that I'm kind and curious, and that I'm peaceful. I really like to hope that I'm more peaceful than most average people on the human race. Or actually, I think most people are. This is the problem we get. Most people are kind of middle of the road, aren't they? We're kind,
Mm,
we're nice, we just want a nice, peaceful life, and then we get those polar opposites that are the loudest people in the room. So I like to think I'm pretty average and in that manner, and
mm.
hopefully whatever that form I come across gets that I'm kind, I'm curious, and that I would come completely in peace, in hope that there would
Yeah.
be further conversations. Be nice.
Yeah. So they would understand that humanity has these capabilities and, that maybe
Yeah.
maybe they could find us like endearing toddlers
Hope.
that are just curious. We just want to learn, and even if we might like not be peaceful in moment, maybe we just need a snack or a nap. That's probably the answer.
Give them that
Or
golden
talk.
retriever energy. Yeah.
Yes. At the Analog Astronaut Conference, we did this icebreaker, and the first thing was like you're in this group and you create, okay, what planet are you from, what's your name, your tribe name, what's your your food and your beverage and this, and then you had this like planet that these squish balls, right? And so okay, now we have to
Mhm.
go to another group where it's one of each, and then now we're going to go on a journey to the moon, and so what food are we bringing with us and what's the drink, and like all this kind of stuff. And every group had tacos in their menu. So it was like, look, this is the answer. Tacos are universal. They connect. They bring us together. So the
It's so
answer is
true.
42 in tacos. That's it.
I like that. I'm from New Mexico. We're all about tacos down here.
Yes.
Taco Tuesdays every day of the week in New Mexico. It's the
Right.
one really amazing thing. I'm like, if you've never been to New Mexico and had real Mexican food, I mean, obviously in Mexico, being completely right, I'm talking about in the US, we
Yes.
are by far the best. So I encourage everyone to come out here to this region and really taste for it yourself.
You heard it best. So tacos. And in June, there is this rocket competition, June 17th through 22nd.
Hmm.
And you want to like and subscribe to the Space in 2K podcasts as well as like and subscribe to the lounge. And
Yes,
you'll continue to get more and more of new perspectives, as well as learn about space in a way that's entertaining, educational, and fun. And maybe you'll find your own pathway in. Alice,
I
thank
like
you
that.
so much for being here today. Where can people find you if they'd like to reach out and connect?
Reach out on LinkedIn. I'm generally pretty proactive at answering back. That's my nice connecting network. And if you've got questions, please throw them my way. I do my best to answer them as quickly as possible. They can also find me at space.n2k.com, which is our website for our podcast. And I always like feedback. So if people will listen to my podcast, our Space Daily podcast, and go, oh, you know what, you didn't cover this. How about cover that? Any ideas they want to pitch to me, you can email me space@n2k.com.
Space@n2k.com. I'm going to pop that up really quickly for anyone who might be watching the recording later or who wants to just get a visual. And then we'll comment in the section as well. Anyone who's watching, no matter what platform you're on, whatever social media channel, can go ahead and put your questions there too and give us a tag, and we'll make sure that Alice can get a chance to get back to you with the
Absolutely.
answer. Yes. Well, Alice, thank you so much. This was so much fun to have you on the show today. I'm so grateful we connected. And I look forward to hopefully connecting with you in person very soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. I've really appreciated the time coming on here.
Thank you. For everyone watching at home, if you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and share it with your friends, with your network. And you can currently follow The Lounge on YouTube. So make sure you go ahead and subscribe to stay abreast of the latest episodes. We'll see you next week.